I've reviewed a number of Sega Saturn games on my channel the last few years. I tend to pick the popular ones that many of you ask for, or the stuff I have personal interest in. But today you are getting a review for a game that I can only describe as one of the worst titles I've ever had the displeasure of owning. But before we begin, it's important for you to understand that I'm not dumping on this game to be funny or join the general consensus that it's one of the worst games ever made. I genuinely wanted this to be a winner. When I was younger, I had been a big fan of the Crow films, particularly the first starring Brandon Lee. The story, the cinematography, the music, and just about everything else really appealed to me. The notion of a video game using that world combined with a Resident Evil style presentation and hand-to-hand combat seemed a perfect fit, so the possibilities were there for a great game. Somewhere along the way things went horribly wrong, and the abomination that resulted is one of the worst titles of that entire generation. I highly advise you exercise some viewer discretion in this one, as I tend to get pretty critical about some of the elements of this game. Let's take a look at The Crow City of Angels for the Sega Saturn. The game was released in early 1997, well after the theatrical release of the film the prior year. It was published by Acclaim and developed by Grey Matter, the company that had done the god-awful Genesis games Wayne's World and The Incredible Crash Dummies. I didn't know it then, but the stage was set for absolute disaster, and boy did these developers deliver. The gameplay takes place as a hybrid of 2D pre-rendered backdrops that use polygons for its enemies, items, and main player. You move around the environment using traditional tank controls, battling bad guys before you can move on to the next area. In the beginning of the game, this is more about melee combat, using punches, kicks, knives, and an assortment of blunt force objects. The hand-to-hand combat system is simple. You have a button to block, crouch, run, grab, and of course punch and kick. After the first few stages, you start to find firearms like pistols and shotguns to help you out in your mission. Unfortunately, your enemies get these weapons as well, and they tend to be far more accurate than you can be. And that's pretty much it. This is what the entire game is. Punch, kick, and shoot your way through enemies and environments that all look the same. There really isn't much to it at all.
Sacrifice.
Visually, the game couldn't be much uglier. It's dark, lacks detail, and the polygon models are just awful. The Crow doesn't look imposing at all, and the repeated textures on the enemies make some 16-bit beat-em-ups look like the most varied games ever. The camera angles are also all over the damn place. In a game like this, the gameplay should be considered first when choosing the angles you have to play from, but they put the viewpoints in the oddest of areas, making combat really difficult at times. The animation for all your movements also looks really awkward, if not downright silly. You don't look like an avenging spirit back from the dead to wreak havoc on the wicked. You look like a geriatric trying to dance. It really is painful. I mean, everything about this is wrong. Overly dark areas that look the same, repeated enemies, bad camera angles, poor textures, ludicrous animations. You can't find a single redeeming thing about this title's graphics. It's a mess, no matter the platform you choose it for. As bad as the graphics are, the sound is worse. The same droning rock riffs plague your ears for most of the game, with the rare break trying to be atmospheric and less grating. The sound effects are awful too, the kind of stuff that repeats often and is overly loud and scratchy. There's not really anything here to show off, so I'll let you hear a couple of gameplay segments to minimize the pain. Good lord, where to begin with the critiques? The gameplay is nothing short of horrendous no matter how you try and frame it. Even once you learn that blocks will keep most enemies' attacks at bay, you learn you still take damage while using it. The crouch will allow you to duck under weapon fire if you can believe it, but the animation is so slow and janky, once you get hit the first time, you'll spaz out and get hit more while that terrible animation plays out. I mean, the entire animation system is dumb as hell looking too. Ducking bullets is bad enough, but your weak ass attacks just look so stupid playing out on the screen. Not one thing in your arsenal makes you feel like a badass. Pressing a direction with your punches and kicks will change up the attacks a bit, but they're all just as ineffective as the one before it. The camera angles do not help with the action either. It's difficult enough to line up your attacks on these guys to begin with, but the camera fights you every step of the way and makes it all worse. Sometimes you can walk straight into enemies and not know they're there until you're being hit because the room takes a second or two to switch the angle. And that's another thing that's broken, the way the rooms switch the view. You do not walk to the edge of the screen to get a new camera angle. They can switch on you right in the middle of the damn room. This disorients you and makes judging direction extremely difficult. The developer obviously realized this and put a marker on the floor to help guide you, but if you kill the bad guys on top of the marker, you have no clue where the heck to go. But for all its troubles early on with the fighting, everything goes to shit once the enemies get guns regularly. Grenade launchers kill you with one hit. Machine guns trap you in a grating animation you can't get out of. Your only chance is to duck, and some enemies simply wait for you to pop back up before they unload on you again. Mistime your attacks and you're dead, and hot damn do you die a lot in this mess. You'll never feel like you have any advantages here. Regular enemies can do major damage to you, and weapons can drain all 3 lives in seconds. The final insult is that there's actually a time limit in place. That's right. If you don't move quickly enough, the crow icon at the top of the screen drains, making you weaker and easier to kill. Talk about slapping shit on a festering wound. These developers seem to have been under the impression that their engine was good enough to implement something like this. You never have any real power, so why in the world make the superhero even weaker? The bottom line is pretty simple. The Crow's City of Angels is one of the very worst games on the Saturn, one of the worst that generation, and frankly, makes games like Superman 64 seem like masterpieces. If I ever do a worst games of all time video, you can bet your ass this turd will be right there in the middle of it.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I'm sorry, Dad. Now we can never be together. You must remain here forever.
My honest opinion is that Acclaim and Gray Matter spit this out just to have a product on the market. Development obviously didn't go well because it missed the summer 1996 debut of the film, a bad omen if there ever was one. This also tanked the developer Gray Matter soon after its release. With such poor sales and terrible critical reception, they couldn't get funding for their next project and had to shutter the doors. Even the Sega Saturn magazines at the time ripped it apart, and they usually gave the bad games a decent score. While I am typically amused by terrible games because they are rarely ever as bad as people say they are, this one is even worse. There is simply nothing redeeming about it. From the moment it begins, nothing about it is fun. Nothing about it entertains. Once Gray Matter and Acclaim realized they had a terrible engine on their hands, they should have just went the traditional route like Die Hard Arcade and kept things simple and familiar. The product they ended up putting out is more than enough reason to explain why Acclaim is no longer with us. You attach shit to your name enough times, Eventually, your customers are gonna flush you. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.